Preseason game number 1 was tough sledding for the Phoenix Suns. While we're not panicking, I think one thing was for sure: the bench is a work in progress, and even that might be putting it nicely. On today's episode of Locked On Suns, we'll talk about where those bench issues are coming from, how to fix them, and the Jay Crowder of it all. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 6 seasons and a writer at Suns.com magazine. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen each and every morning. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Hopefully the hangover from preseason game number 1 was not too bad. Guys, we are everywhere: Google, Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen, as well as YouTube, where you can watch the show. If it's your first time listening, go ahead and hit follow or subscribe wherever you're finding us. And if you're on YouTube, drop me a comment down below telling me what you think is the biggest problem with this Suns bench. Folks, you can also follow along on Twitter at LockedOnPHXSuns if that's your thing. So, one of the biggest glaring, obvious problems in the Suns' loss to the Adelaide 36ers, a team that many of us probably had never heard of until this week, is that the bench just blew it, just puked all over themselves. Like there's no pretty way to put what happened. Torrey Craig played 26 minutes. The Suns were outscored by 21 points in his minutes. Same with Cam Payne. Jock Landale, Damian Lee, Landry Shamet were also pretty ugly. So then you look at the starters, all of them played all together. There were no combo lineups, bench starter mixes. And so 22 minutes for all the starters, all of them were a plus 11. So the Suns outscored the 36ers, I almost said 76ers, by 11 points when the starters were out there. So that's almost no reason for concern. I mean, if the Suns, I can tell you right now, if the Suns starters outscore opponents by 11 every night, the season's going to go pretty well. All right. But that other side of the equation is where the problem is. All right. So I want to go back a little bit to the past 2 seasons in terms of lineups, because the bench lineup we saw yesterday, it was different because there's some new faces. There's some missing faces, maybe one in particular, obviously, that we can all point to. And then Dario Saric didn't play, which I went into detail on yesterday. So if you missed the recap show, go ahead and hit that one. But the bench lineup was, for the most part, Payne, Shamet, Lee, Craig, Landale. Okay, so the Landale part was a surprise, again, with Dario sitting. And the Craig part feels like it's probably the most replaceable. I mean, yeah, there's a bunch of different directions this could go, but he did not play very well. He didn't play very well most of his stint in Phoenix last year when they traded for him. I honestly did not expect he would be back on this team just because of that. I felt like they needed something more reliable there. He is a very valuable type of player, though, so I get it. What he does in terms of rebounding, in terms of being able to play some defense is valuable, but you look at the overall picture of this lineup, it's just not working. Cam Payne is not getting the level of shot that he used to get back in the bubble or the following season. You're not getting much out of Landry Shamet. Again, I know it's just one preseason game, but it felt very similar. Damian Lee's just really a shooter and cutter. He's an off-ball offensive player. And then Landale, like, he's going to need somebody to set him up. This is basically his second NBA season, and he's not really he didn't even get much of a chance last year. He was on a bad Spurs team and was really just a bit player. So it's not coming together well. And there's not an obvious answer in sight unless Dario can really step it up or one of these deeper bench guys turn it around or get in there and are able to make an impact. Dwayne Washington, Ish Wainwright, I don't know. There's not, that's not going to be the thing that saves the Suns season, right? But all of that said, I do think there's reason for optimism. So, and most of it might be Dario Saric and some external help, but those are on the table. The first stat I'm going to give you going back time a little bit is not going to be very bright, but it is going to reinforce why this is not tenable. That Monty Williams, I don't think he's going to be able to stick with this lineup for very long. This bench unit at least. So all of the lineups with Cam Payne, Landry Shamet, and Torrey Craig together and none of the starters on the floor. Okay, so and that's the current starters. That's not Crowder. Okay, so I'm taking out any lineups where Cam was in there, etc. So those three players together on the floor with no starters last season, all of those lineups combined were outscored by 16 points per 100 possessions across 111 possessions. So they played quite a bit together, those three without other starters on the floor, and they got crushed. Okay? There's just, when that is like the nucleus of your bench, JaVale was out there a lot with those guys. You would see any number of other wings, but that was kind of the nucleus with JaVale. But JaVale's a guy who needs to be set up. I mean, there was some of those minutes. Well, no, Frank Kaminsky wasn't ever overlapping with Craig. So there's just not enough juice, I think, is really what you're looking at. And the bottom line is that problem hasn't changed unless this guy changes it. So as a refresher, it's been talked about ad nauseum. Monty talked about it constantly last year. It's almost become a joke if you're on Suns Reddit or Suns Twitter that Dario unlocks Cameron Payne. Okay, but the numbers bear it out. I think there's something a little bit deeper going on with Payne where teams have just solved him. They know that he's going to rely on the floater. It's not very effective. He's not a great finisher. He doesn't draw fouls, and he's only going to go to his left. So if you can defend against the pull-up three, although that's not even terrifying, and then you can, keep him from going left, he's out of tricks at that point. I think that's the problem. But I do think there's something to the idea of Payne plus good ball movement plus space is at least going to result in something a little bit better, because in the first Chris Paul season, so 2021, the Suns outscored opponents by 24 points per 100 possessions across 287 possessions, which is a lot of playing time together that year. So they blew out teams when those two guys were on the floor, and it was a big sample. And a lot of those lineups, when I was doing the digging earlier, a lot of those didn't include Cam Johnson. So it was no starters. In that case, I did have it as Jay Crowder, not Cam Johnson. But even looking through it, Cam missed time at various points that year. They were still figuring things out. They were mixing and matching, etc. So a lot of those lineups didn't even include Cam, and they were still pretty good. There was some time when Jay was coming off the bench when he was coming back from injury that year. So it was a wide variety of who was on the court. But when Payne and Saric were out there without starters, they outscored opponents by 24 points per 100 possessions across a ton of playing time. So I think what's wrong is a combination of things. One, they're reintegrating Jock, and I'll talk about him later in the show in more detail, but I don't think he's quite the floor spacer right now. The way that they're using him is mostly as a post guy, elbow guy, face-up guy, and I don't think he has the level of skill as a passer overall that you saw with Kaminsky or with Saric. Okay, so combination of things is clogging things up a little bit. Plus, the other guys out there are just not doing enough. I do think even the version of Payne that we've seen, it's him plus a legitimate, small ball, versatile, offensively minded five and decent shooters. That can still be a serviceable bench unit, but serviceable might not be enough, because the other part of this is when you're looking at what's wrong, there's a ton of great bench lineups around the West. And we've seen that, not having depth has hurt the Suns the past couple of years. And it's not all about bench lineups, because we know, in crunch time or in playoff series, it's going to be mixing and matching. Rotations are going to get trimmed. But the Clippers have guys like Terrence Mann, Norm Powell, Robert Covington coming off the bench. The Warriors have Jordan Poole and Jonathan Kuminga and James Wiseman. The Kings even have Malik Monk and Rashawn Holmes. The Grizzlies have Tyus Jones and Brandon Clark and John Conchar. The Pelicans, who we saw a lot of these depth pieces take it to the Suns, have Larry Nance and Jose Alvarado and Trey Murphy. And the Mavericks, who also somehow surprisingly ended up with better depth than the Suns, have Tim Hardaway coming off the bench now. And they have Maxi Kleba, and they have Christian freaking Wood, who might win Sixth Man of the Year, who they're putting on the bench despite being their biggest acquisition this offseason. So the Suns aren't going to be able to survive with the bench this bad, and there's not an amazing answer in sight. That said, I do have a few ideas about how to mix things up a little bit and what this tells Jay Crowder. So let's get into all of that in just a sec. First, today's show, guys, brought to you by Built Bar. If you have not tried Built Bar Puffs yet, you are depriving yourself of one of life's greatest joys. And guess what? There's a new flavor. Ready? Delicious, indulgent cookie dough covered in chocolate. That's right. Built has done it again. Let me introduce you to our new favorite and yours, cookie dough chunk puffs, a light and chewy texture, real cookie dough chunks. And of course, like all Built Bars, covered in 100% real chocolate. All of the joy of eating cookie dough right out of that bowl without the hassle of making it. So run to Built.com, snag a box for you and the family. Perfect treat to get yourself ready in the morning, get yourself fueled up before or after a workout, whatever it is for you. It's delicious. It's healthy. It does trick. Go to Built.com. Use the promo code LOCKEDON15, LOCKEDON15 to get 15% off your next order. That's promo code LOCKEDON15 for 15% off at Built.com. Alrighty, so how do you solve this problem if you're the Suns? Now, I want to preface this. Monty Williams has probably spent more time thinking about it than I've spent thinking about mostly anything. This is not me giving a lesson out. This is me guessing what I think we might see. All right. So I'm going to base it on what we've actually seen in the past. What have they been talking about so far? One of the things that jumped immediately is the Dario thing. And just to address that briefly, I'll get into it a little more in the last segment here, because I'm going to break Jock Landale's game down in detail here. But I'm not sure why Dario's not playing. People might say it's the injury, but he played a pretty good chunk of minutes at Eurobasket and he was fine. I don't think Monty has just suddenly decided he doesn't like Dario as a player. As recently as Media Day, he was talking him up. And we know when Dario was healthy, Monty rode him pretty hard. He was a really important piece for this team. So maybe it's about potentially trading him. Maybe there's another injury that has happened recently that they're not telling us about. I don't know. It's fishy. But until we know more, we just have to go based on what we've seen. So a couple more numbers for you. Last season, the Suns played 541 possessions with Booker as the only starter and 295 possessions with Chris Paul as the only starter. So that might sound weird, because you would see it. We have these memories of Chris and the bench being a pretty effective unit, maybe more so in his first year here, less so last year. But still, I think where Book really racks those up is, one, Chris missed more time. So Booker had those moments where Paul was out and he would have been more, playing more of those minutes just because he was the only one healthy. And then there's those stretches at the end of the first quarter, sometimes at the beginning of the fourth quarter, whatever it might be, where Booker is out there with bench units. Okay, so the problem is Booker was bad. Those lineups with Booker were bad. All right, the Booker only lineups were not very good last year. Whereas even though there were a little bit fewer of them, the Chris Paul and bench lineups were pretty killer. Okay, so to me, you're already looking at a pretty clear answer. One, when we start to see these mixed lineups where there's some bench and some starters, Chris Paul playing with the bench, not half of his minutes or anything crazy like that, but integrating that a little bit more to juice things up. I think we will see. We have seen it in the past, and I think Monty's going to have no choice but to do that. Something else here interesting, and I talked about this a little bit last week, of Ayton as the only starter in the lineup. Can that be something where we already know getting him offensive opportunities is going to be a focus this year? Could it happen with benches? And I brought that up especially when Monty was talking about Dario playing some 4. Okay. Because those two guys together, which Monty has also specifically referenced, you have some interesting options, right? You can have Ayton or Dario at the elbow, and then you can have the other one either spacing out or in the dunker spot. They can run some interesting high-low action where they're screening or being screened for in different ways. But if you look last year, Ayton was only on the court as the sole starter out there in a lineup for 16 total minutes. 16 total possessions, which is probably even less than 16 minutes. Maybe it's about the same. So it's something to explore more if Saric gets in the rotation. Until then, I don't see Ayton and Jock lineups. I don't see Ayton and Biyombo lineups. And then it just starts to be like, okay, well then when are those guys playing, etc. We know Landale's going to get in there. We know Biyombo's going to get some run at some point. So I think if Dario plays, you could see Ayton and Dario minutes. Otherwise, probably not. What are the best bench lineups then that are mixed? Okay, so it'd be easy to say, okay, a mixed lineup, so to speak, could be all the starters and Dario. Okay, that's not what I mean. I mostly mean Chris Paul. So if we're looking at all of this and it's kind of becoming clear, Chris plus the bench is going to be a good way to juice it, then what are some lineups that you can work with that? So couple options, and they're basically with Dario or without. So with Dario, I think you could go something like Paul Payne Shamet-ish Dario. I like that because you get a little bit more size with Ish out there because you're playing so small in the backcourt. I mean, Paul Payne Shamet, we saw that at times last season, but it's pretty small. So if you have a bigger team that you're going up against, like, the Clippers bench, for instance, with Terrence Mann and Norm Powell and Robert Covington, then you maybe run into some problems. So getting to have Ish out there, getting to have Dario out there can help you at least just match up better, right? The bench isn't a time to tinker too much, but you want to have the right sized people if you can. Another option, if Dario is not out there, would be Paul Shamet, Lee, Damian Lee, Torrey Craig, Jock Landale. And I put that one there to have Payne be out. I mean, I don't think Payne will not play. I doubt the Suns just don't have the depth to just straight up bench him unless Dwayne Washington really, really steps up in that two-way slot. But that's another look where Paul, maybe Paul plays with the bench, and then maybe you see some minutes where Payne is in with the starters, and that's how you do it. And Shamet kind of becomes like the backup, kind of like that third guard, backup guard in its own way, where he's playing some one, whatever. And then Damian Lee, I don't think is a bad player. I think he has a role on this team if it materializes, if there's injuries, if they don't get something back for Crowder soon, but he's a shooter. And so with this lineup, I like that because Craig's not really a shooter. Landale's not always going to be spaced out, so that gives you a little bit more shooting. There's different ways to do it, and I think when Paul's out there and you can just run some basic pick and roll, run some basic offense to get guys open, it just becomes a little easier to build those lineups rather than Payne, who we've talked about really needs that open lane. He's going to make some boneheaded turnovers. You want guys with Payne's out there. You want guys who can kind of run and move the ball, and you need the right types of players. So I think Paul loosens that up a little bit. He's going to make it all a little bit easier. That's what I would think you'll see. Again, the Dario question mark is there. And then the other question mark is Jay Crowder. So does this affect the Jay Crowder talks, right? Does this affect if I'm James Jones watching the Adelaide 36ers beat my bench to a pulp? Granted, again, also big caveat, the shooting was insane, but still, that bench did not look inspiring. Am I thinking of the Jay Crowder talks differently after that? I think no. I think if anyone has been watching this team for, since the finals of 2021, anyone who's watched us would know, who's watched this team would know that this group it needs depth, right? So, I think all the things are the same. You need to do a deal before opening night, like Monty has already said he wants to do. Without Cam off the bench, you need to get scoring in return for Crowder. So that doesn't mean it has to be a guard. That doesn't mean it has to be any particular type of player, but you need somebody who can score. Okay, so Derek White could still be a good option in a bigger deal. You maybe have to give up a first-round pick in that situation, a protected one, and another player because he makes a little more. Dylan Brooks, you could probably get in something like a 1-for-1 deal, which is my number one choice right now. Jordan Clarkson, who we've talked about a lot over the past few months because the Jazz have dismantled their roster. But don't forget about other Utah guys quickly. I haven't mentioned either one of these names, but they could be something to keep an eye on. Malik Beasley is on Utah. He came over in the Gobert trade. He is a gunner shooter, but he really puts them up and he really makes them. Like, he is a versatile, high-volume shooter. There was a game, I believe it was against the Suns last season, where he scored 30 points and he only took threes. I don't think he even took a two, and he made like 10 threes in a game. So that's the type of guy that he is. That would be a huge upgrade over the Damian Lee minutes, the Landry Shamet minutes, and he has a little more juice to his game if he was in a system where he was asked to do that. And then Lauri Markkanen. I don't know if he's a perfect fit because it seems like defensively it's always going to be a question mark. And when you're talking about, okay, is it Lauri and Jock both playing together? That starts to be a little bit limited defensively. But we know the Suns were going after Bojan Bogdanovic. Markkanen is a very similar player. Not quite as good of a shooter, but a pretty good shooter and younger and everything else. He's expensive, but he only has 2 more years on his contract after this one. You could do worse. I don't think it's terrible. So keep an eye on the Jazz still, because they still have plenty of rotation players that could go. Close things out, I want to talk about Jock Landale in detail. I told you guys I would do these rotation bench player capsules, so we'll do that again here, starting with Jock Landale. What is he? What can't he do? What his future might look like? All of that after one more quick break. All right, coming out of the break, quickly reminder, guys, to listen to our Locked On NBA season preview show, where I am recording on Tuesday the Revenge Tour group. So I believe it's Miami, Philly, Dallas, Denver, these teams that are right on the cusp, have some question marks, and they're back at it. So listen to that show on the Locked On NBA feed. We might even be running some of those shows here on the team feeds as well. So that is something to look forward to. But Jock Landale, probably the biggest surprise. It's only been a week. Media Day was only a week ago as I'm recording this here on Monday the 3rd. But he has really stepped up. I thought for sure Josh Okogie would be the guy that we'd all be hearing about. He has this hamstring issue. I do think when he gets healthy, we will hear more about him. He was our first, role player capsule. This is number 2. So who is Jock Landale? We've seen him in preseason once, but I went back and looked a little bit more, watched some of his highlights, watched some of the overseas stuff. Look, I did not do anything thorough. I'm not going back and watching full games, but in the post, he's legit 7 feet. He's big. He's strong. He's the real deal. Like, he is a big dude. He has a great hook shot with his right hand, but he can get to it with his left hand too, and it's pretty solid. His footwork, it's serviceable. Like, he has an up and under. He can put the ball on the ground a little bit and get to those hook shots. He can pump fake you and, get to a mid-range, like a fall away type of shot. Is it Dirk? No. It's serviceable, and it's pretty darn efficient when he does it. He's also a very good offensive rebounder. He also shot 39% on 189 three-point attempts over his overseas career in Europe and Australia. And, with all of that said, he can be effective as a roller or a popper. So he's also somebody who has pretty good hands on the roll. He's going to be able to catch the ball, maybe dribble once and dunk it, maybe, catch the ball and actually settle into a post up. He's comfortable there. But of course, then because of the 3-point shooting, because he's a pretty agile, mobile guy, he can also pop out to three and he can make good decisions. It's not just pop out to three and take a spot up three if it's there, or give the ball back up and reverse it and start over. He can put the ball on the ground and drive from the 3-point line. He can, make a good decision, keep the offense moving if that shot's not going to be there. So these are things that make it pretty versatile, and he can score. I mean, he's a gifted offensive player. Like, there's no doubt about that. What can he not do? So to keep on the offense for one more second, I don't feel like watching him so far. He's quite at the caliber of passer that Dario Saric or Frank Kaminsky were. Okay, so that's a high bar, right? I think Dario's always been a great passer. I think Frank developed that when he got to Phoenix. So I'm not saying Jock needs to have that now. I'm also not ruling out that he could get better there. I don't think he, can't read the game at all. I just think he's not going to be somebody who's dropping dimes. The other thing is the defense. I mean, he's not going to be a switch defender, right? You're not going to put him out on Luka Doncic in a switch. You're not going to want him guarding Giannis as the primary matchup out on the perimeter. These are not things you're going to want to do. And he doesn't block a ton of shots at the rim either. So you're a little bit limited in what you're going to be able to get defensively. You're probably going to end up using him like you use Dario and Frank, right? Mostly going to be dropping down into the paint in the pick and roll and just getting in the way. But he's taller than Dario, taller than Frank, long arms. So that can work, especially if you're just coming off the bench. It's not like he's starting or playing a major role for this team. So that brings us to the role. What is he for the Suns? As I've said numerous times in this show and over the past week, basically, it seems like he's taken the backup center role over already. Again, we don't know what happened with Dario. We don't know why he's not playing. I think Biyombo will play too. So this is not me saying that, Jock Landale is going to be playing 25 minutes a night come, the regular season, but he's in that role. And I think he's there to stay for however he got there. I think he's there to stay. I think he can basically be a better version of what Kaminsky and Aaron Baines were for Monty Williams in his time with the Suns, right? People who can finish plays as scorers inside or outside, set good screens, rebound, do all that stuff, and fit in the offense, right? Be able to handle a dribble handoff, be able to handle, being at the elbow and doing what you need to do to set up a play, do a screen, catch the ball, kick it back out, the things that this 0.5 system with lots of screening and pick and roll requires. And he's a little more athletic and mobile and a little bit of a better shooter, right? So I think that's all good stuff. I think it's crazy to say because he's a player who's basically not had an NBA career so far. I wouldn't be surprised if he had stretches just as good as Kaminsky, and if not, I don't know, maybe a little bit better. I want to believe he's only 26 and he has had such a little track record that he could even be better than that. I don't know. Those are both good role players for this team, especially Baines. He's had a long career, but I think Landale's that impressive. I really do. I think he's a really talented player. He's already turned heads and, gotten attention from his teammates and the coaching staff in camp. I don't see a reason why he can't be as good as those two. And then in the future is interesting. And obviously there's a long way to go. We don't even know, maybe he takes the floor against the Mavs and they expose him and it just becomes clear this was all preseason hype. Never mind. I don't want to, we don't know. We have no way of knowing what's going to happen, but just to set the stage, I mean, this is the ultimate buy low, right? He's 26. He was undrafted. He came off of a few seasons overseas and he signed a non-guaranteed contract, right? That's about as troubling or risky of an opportunity to come back to the U.S. as you can find. But because of all that, and we can assume he'll last the entire season and have his contract guaranteed and be a Sun throughout the year, he'll be a restricted free agent next summer. Which is interesting, right? Because usually that results in the team getting a pretty good deal But you never know. I don't think he's somebody that the Suns at this point in time are going to be prioritizing, but it would be nice, right, to get a young 26-year-old backup big to replace JaVale, who was making $5 million last year, Dario, who's making 9-10 this year. If you could get somebody, bring him, develop him this year, get something out of him, bring him back, you're talking about a cheap, young, pretty good, solid backup center. And that's hard to find, right? It can be, especially to do what the Suns need from their centers in this system. So really, the end of the day, like, I'm just looking forward to seeing him. I'm looking forward to seeing him get 10 to 20 minutes a game on a good team, a championship contending team with which this Suns team will be, for a whole year. Like, he just has never gotten that. He's bounced around to that European team and this Australian team and this national team and that summer league team. And now he's here. And I think he's carved out a role for himself already. So I'm just looking forward to it. He is not somebody that I took seriously as a difference maker when they got him, but here we are, and he seems like he will be. So that'll do it for today's show, guys. A big thanks for making Locked On Suns your first listen here on this Tuesday. We'll see what happens with this bench, and I will be back with you guys tomorrow. In the meantime, another reminder to check out Locked On NBA and our league preview, season preview series going up all week long over on that feed. I'll talk to you tomorrow.